Hello, folks. Welcome from your various places all around the country to our Next Generation Digital Exchange webinar. Today, we'll be talking about an extraordinarily exciting initiative, the Delta Creative Placemaking Initiative. And we're excited to have our panelists with us, as well as folks from around the country. My name is Matthew Fluharty. I'm the Executive Director of Art of the Rural. And I'd like for just a moment to put our conversation today in context with the series of larger conversations which have kind of composed these digital exchanges over the last 8 months. In July 2016, with the support of the National Endowment for the Arts, Art of the Rural and the Rural Policy Research Institute launched Next Generation, which was an initiative focused on bridging conversation, collaborations, and cross-sector network building within the rural creative placemaking field. Next Generation operates through 3 interlinked activities: cross-sector regional networks, a digital learning commons that folks can find at ruralgeneration.org, and a national rural creative placemaking summit. The inaugural convening of that summit was in Iowa City last fall and brought together 300 leaders from 38 states to think about the future of our collective field. So to build upon the energy of that summit and to continue to spark national dialogue, these Next Generation digital exchanges hope to draw on the power of connection, bridge further conversation across regions and fields and place-based philosophies, and in short, just continue to bring us together. So roughly every 2 to 4 weeks, these exchanges offer an opportunity for us to have conversation, to engage with leaders that might be beyond our geography or our disciplinary field, and just to continue to keep this ball rolling and see what new ideas and projects could be sparked through it. So each one of our digital exchanges offers about 2 to 4 voices from across the country. And each one pretty much hovers around a specific theme, challenge, or opportunity that we all collectively encounter in our work. And it's important to say that while this is a webinar and we're all in this digital space, our hope is that these can be as conversational and, I mean, to some degree, as improvisational as possible. For folks who might be new to the Zoom application on this topic of improvisation and exchange, you'll see a couple icons at the very bottom of the screen, and I'd like to point folks' attention to 2 of those. Towards the right, you'll see the little comic book cloud with the dots inside. That's a chat function. If you click on that, you'll open up a sidebar on the right where folks can contribute comments, links, connections as this conversation is evolving. And about 2 icons to the left of that, you'll see a little box with Q&A. And as the first 40 minutes of this conversation unfold, if folks have questions, please feel free to add those questions inside that box. And our panelists and moderator will consider those in about the last quarter of our time together today. So this digital exchange program is created in partnership with Art of the Rural and the Rural Policy Research Institute. And it's made possible through the support of the National Endowment for the Arts and the McKnight Foundation, 2 of our strongest allies across the rural cultural landscape. We're grateful for their support. The digital exchanges are produced at the Outpost Collaborative Space, which is located in Winona, Minnesota, and is national headquarters for Art of the Rural. I'd like to very briefly introduce our guests and then pass the microphone. We are so honored to have these amazing panelists with us today. We have Chris Masingill from the Delta Regional Authority, Joe McKinney from the National Association of Development Organizations, Linda Langston from the National Association of Counties, and Jen Hughes from the National Endowment for the Arts. Our conversation today will be moderated by Chuck Fluharty of the Rural Policy Research Institute. And at this point, I'm going to pass the microphone to him.
Thanks, Matt, and good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We really do appreciate you being with us, and truly an honor to moderate this panel with 4 friends and colleagues who are at the center of National Rural Creative Placemaking. In teeing this up, just let me, if I might, follow on Matt's comment about the Next Gen Rural Creative Placemaking Summit, which occurred last October in Iowa City. For most of us, the highlight of that conference, which had many, many, many highlights, that has had the most lasting impact, occurred when Chairman Chris Masingill from the Delta Regional Authority at the end of the summit in a closing plenary panel regarding policy, where Linda Langston happened to also be a panelist for NACo. Chris suggested that he had learned in his journey to unite economic development and other sectors so much at the conference that he really wanted to dig more deeply into the potential for creative placemaking to move more deeply into the work of DRA with arts and culture. And he did not make it as a passing comment, actually. It was a very strong comment at the end. And there were really many lasting, I think, impacts from that conference. But almost to a person, the people that were participating felt like that was the most significant moment, because it capstoned what united RUPRI and Art of the Rural as a public policy shop and an arts and culture entity looking at next generation engagement. And that is highlighted by our theory of change, which basically, very simply, is we need many things to build sustainable rural communities, to attract the next generation of rural citizens, and to keep those that are there. But if we don't build inclusive, expressive, culturally and artistically significant communities, there's much less chance that ensuing generations of Americans will decide to help build those communities. And that means economic and community developers who have historically been about job creation and economic development in any way must begin to think about the quality of their place. Because we know in the future, folks are moving to places and jobs are following them, not the reverse. And Chris talked about that, and he indicated that the Delta Regional Authority was going to try to do something about it. Well, 4 months later, they did. And it's been our deep honor in RUPRI to work with his team and his board and the members of this region in beginning to take action on that. And we're honored that Chris can be with us today to share a bit of that journey and talk about where they are. So, Chairman Masingill, would you please lead us off and tell a bit about your personal journey in this space, but also the exciting work DRA has undertaken? And I'll just indicate the other three members of this panel, their organizations are part of the National Partnership Group for this DRA initiative. So Chris, if you would, please welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today, Chris.
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you for your continued leadership and education. I tell you, every time I get a chance to be with Chuck and the members of this panel, who I have such great respect for, these folks have laid the groundwork for people like me and organizations like DRA to partner and to continue to lift up. You guys continue to impress me and continue to educate me as it relates to the importance of focusing on rural, the importance of looking at things differently when it comes to rural economic development. And this is certainly no different. And Chuck, thank you for those kind remarks. But I tell you, for me, looking at how we got to where we were, it's really because of the inspiration of the people that have come on board to be partners with us in this initiative. The Delta Regional Authority is an economic development organization. We represent 8 states, 252 counties and parishes in one of the most historic and iconic places in America called the Mississippi River Delta region and Black Belt of Alabama. And in our part of the world, we've got significant challenges like other parts of America, and we're looking for new ways to do stuff. We know that we've got incredible assets. We know we've got wonderful people, and our impact on culture and food and history and literature and arts and cultures is amazing. People from all over the world come to the Delta region for that culture. But in so many aspects, we've been doing traditional economic development for a long time. And one of the things that has always amazed me is that there is a huge desire in rural America, in the Delta region, that we love our place. We love our people. We love our communities. We've got incredible assets, and we've been doing things a certain way for a long time. And creative placemaking is certainly not a new concept, although I will confess, as I've confessed to Chuck and others during the course of really learning and growing and understanding creative placemaking. Because I'll be honest with you, as I've shared with Chuck before and to our audience, I come from the world of traditional economic development. That I'm an economic developer by trade. We work to go after industrial recruitment, and our focus is pretty clear. But what we've learned over the course of the last several years is that there's more than one way to do this, and economic development is not a one size fits all. And the reality is not every rural community is going to get a car manufacturing facility or a big steel plant. That'd be great if it happens, but the reality is that we got to be thinking about things a little differently. And we've certainly identified that adding and integrating arts and culture into local economic development and community development strategies is important. And it's something that has gained prominence. And particularly when you live in one of the most historic and iconic places in America, every community in our footprint has some unique assets. And then how can we continue to bring people to the table that can expand on that? We can bring in arts and culture and add that to the conversation. So when we're creating our economic development strategies, if we're wanting to focus on workforce training or small business development, these things are impacted by the power of art and culture and creative placemaking. It does impact workforce training. It does create opportunities for small business development and entrepreneurship. It even creates a stronger connection to people's community. It gives people an opportunity to have that stronger sense of place. It provides new opportunities for new investments in our rural communities because of the excitement and the strategies around this. So this certainly was not something that we had a grand plan to, but one of the things that really struck me the most is that there have been some incredible people doing this for a long time in rural America, in the Delta region. But as the thought process has gotten more prominence, we now know that there's strategies that can be put in place to be successful with this approach. We now know that creative placemaking works. We've seen examples from around the country. It's worked in the urban areas. It certainly has worked in rural areas around the country. So from our perspective, it was, hey, how can we elevate this? We need to be better partners with this. We need to be more intentional about communicating to our elected officials, our community leaders, our business community, the economic developers about, hey, you really need to take this on, add this to your toolkit. This is a legitimate strategy that every community in our region can be connected to, and there's ways that you can do this. Even if you want to do industrial recruitment, you can add this idea of creative placemaking to those strategies. Because guess what? We've also learned that when you have an amazing quality of place and you're dealing with a site consultant or you've got a site selector in your community, hey, the ability to retain the jobs you have because you're now creating a greater sense of community and place and civic engagement and civic involvement, and people love that and they want to be there, and young people don't want to leave their home and their community. But it also helps close the deals, because when decision makers are looking about where new companies are going to go and they have that sense of community, that sense of place, it helps with that ability to be competitive. So at the end of the day, for us, this is not some magic wand. This is about growing our communities, keeping the jobs that we have, giving us a sense of our young people a reason to stay and continue to build on that place. So we're just honored and proud of the partnership that we've created with NEA and RUPRI and NACo and NATO, and the realization that this is a real community and economic development strategy. And in fact, as some of you all probably know, the leading national organization for economic developers, the International Economic Development Council, recently put out a major thought leader document called The Role of Placemaking, Place Matters. And they recognize that creative placemaking is important to integrate and to engage in economic development. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of what we're doing to help elevate this idea and this school of thought, and we're going to continue to stay committed on doing that. So Chuck, thank you for giving me an opportunity to be a part, and thank you for being such a strong partner.
Thank you, Chairman Masingill. Chris, if you wouldn't mind, would you share a bit of your leadership design, the workshop that occurred for staff, and kind of where we are? Tell folks a bit how you've really structured your leadership around this in the Delta, and just give folks a bit of a sense of the journey DRA is in right now, if you would, please.
You bet. Well, it all started, as you mentioned, at your Rural Creative Summit, the Iowa City Summit. We had been really thinking about this for a little bit. We had been seeing some of the great stuff coming out of NEA, the work that they've done, the publications that they have produced around creative placemaking, the various national partners. And so we got a sense that, hey, this is something that we need to get more involved in. And we left your summit, and then after we picked up various pieces, I thought we're going to be more proactive. And not only are we going to be more proactive, I'm going to bring in the experts, many who are on this webinar, along with folks who are seen as true leaders in this space. You're going to come to Clarksdale, Mississippi, and where I'm going to bring my entire team, and you're going to educate us. I wanted to learn more about this. I mentioned earlier that most of my economic development training was done on the traditional side. And what I wanted to understand is that how can these pieces really fit together? Do I really understand what creative placemaking is? I've understood the quality of place idea. I've heard it for a long time. I get that, but in the world of economic development, oftentimes we operate in silos, and we don't engage with other elements. Now, it's a part of our plan, and we're trying to be very inclusive, but the reality is, at the end of the day, it's about getting the deal done. It's about your business retention and expansion strategies. It's about making sure you're staying focused on helping to create these opportunities. So step one for us, Chuck, was we had to get better educated. I really wanted to have an understanding of what creative placemaking was all about. So I asked the NEA and Springboard and Arts Council to come and share with us through, I believe, was it 2 days, Alex?
2 days. 2 days.
It was 3 days, and they were so
3
generous.
days, yeah.
Yeah, it was 3 days. And they were so generous to come to Clarksdale, and I had my entire team, my entire development team. We got into our conference room, and we got boot camped for 3 days to make sure that we truly had a handle on what this incredible idea was and how do you do it and what are some strategies and what's worked and what's not worked. And lo and behold, there were some incredible examples that Jen and others pointed out to us right here in my backyard about some incredible models and some things that community leaders have been doing, but they've been doing it on their own. They hadn't been doing it in the context of pulling in economic developers and community leaders and business leaders and saying, hey, this is actually part of our economic development strategy. We know this stuff impacts the economy and communities' ability to grow. All you got to do is pull some of the stats to see how arts and culture and tourism impacts a local community. Some of that, the last numbers that I've seen, over $1 trillion of services, goods and services from arts and culture. That's amazing. Over 1 million jobs because of the increase of employment from arts and culture. So for an economic developer, this is not about having a lofty policy conversation about how awesome art is. This is about moving the needle for economic opportunities and competitiveness in rural America, in the Delta region. And if we can do that by harnessing the incredible aspects of arts and culture into economic development, absolutely. If we can revitalize vacant buildings and land and build infrastructure by bringing smart people to the table that are involved with arts and cultures, let's do that. Why haven't we been doing that before? We need to do it even more. And if it means we can train the next generation of workers and leaders because of the connection to their community and arts and culture and all the incredible assets that makes us unique, let's do that. Let's double down on that. And let's continue to grow that kind of opportunity. So we did the workshop. We got better trained, and in fact, I got more excited and enthusiastic, and I feel like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid and an apostle for creative placemaking because of how powerful I know that it can be, and because of some of the examples that I've seen. And I am all in. And as a guy who's been a traditional economic developer I tell my colleagues all the time, you've got to be open-minded about this. You got to be intentional. And so the next step we did is that, well, we got to incentivize, and you do that through resources. So we found a way at DRA to put together some resources, almost $460,000 that we've been able to set aside to go, look, if you come through some of these workshops that we're doing around the region, if you will really look at creative placemaking as a part of your local community development strategy, we'll put resources on the table to help seed your project. And then on top of that, we'll provide real technical assistance, experts that will be with you on this journey, that will come to your community, that will be a part of the opportunity to grow an idea in a project that's tied to arts and culture and economic development. So we've got resources on the table, about $460,000. We'll provide about $30,000 worth of seed money for the first set of projects, because this is a pilot. And then we'll provide about 50 hours of expert consulting to help grow your project and your ideas around creative placemaking. But we've come through this journey. I feel like it's been overnight. It's been so fast and furious, but it's something that we certainly believe in now, and it's one we're going to stay committed to.
Well, thanks a lot, Chris. And I know there'll be questions for you as we move through this. I'll just share for everyone that's listening. We're in Vicksburg today. We just completed the 4th of 6 workshops. The response that the chairman has garnered in the region is absolutely unbelievable. The workshops have been tremendously well attended. The energy is very high, and this process will end up in an application to NRA. Those are due in the region on the 4th of August, and so we're finishing those, and community response just unbelievable. Want to turn now, if we could, to members of the partnership group that helped Chris to design this work. And I'd like to start with Jen Hughes at NEA, who, without her support for this, actually none of us would be in this space. And everyone you're looking at today has been blessed by the support of Jen, not only personally in providing support and wise counsel, but also in the work of Arttown, one of their grant programs that is really supporting all this. So Jen, if you wouldn't mind, would you share a bit of the NEA perspective on creative placemaking, and particularly your thoughts about the DRA initiative? And we thank you again for the work NEA has done to support Chairman Masingill's leadership. So let's turn it over to Jen for some thoughts. Jen?
Well, thanks, Chuck. Thank you for that very generous introduction. I've been at the NEA for over 6 years now, and I will say this is the single thing that I'm most excited about seeing come to fruition, because, you know, beginning from sort of the arts and cultural space, hearing somebody like Chairman Masingill really speak about arts and culture in its broad contributions to many other sectors that really influence the quality of life in place is just really compelling, and has been incredible leadership that I am really grateful for and inspired by every day. So as many of you may or may not know, and as Chuck referenced, the NEA began investing explicitly in creative placemaking around 7 years ago. We've been able to fund 478 Arttown grants all across the country, many of which focus on a partnership between a local or tribal government organization and at least one nonprofit 501c3 arts and cultural organization. And what that's really helped to facilitate is to set the table, set the economic and community development table in local communities, to recognize that arts and culture has some very valuable perspectives in being able to move forward sort of the quality of life in place and drive economic development. And we've really witnessed that. But more excitingly, I think it's been really neat to see the sort of innovation that's taken place in rural America in particular. 18.5% of the Arttown grants have been made directly to rural communities. So these are non-metropolitan statistical areas, communities of less than 50,000. Everything from a community to 20, up to some of the large urban centers that we've also been able to see great work happen. And so just to put on all of your radar, we have another funding deadline that will come up in September 11th of 2017. And as we continue to invest and support this work, we've really evolved our thinking beyond just investing in those local pilot projects, but also in thinking about how do we build a national network of practitioners, both within the arts and cultural sector, but more broadly, the economic development sector, the community development sector, so that they can also, similar to the way that DRA is really leading in embracing the arts and cultural strategies that can drive quality of life in communities, we want to get other folks and practitioners that are working locally to be really well equipped in also beginning to think about this as a viable strategy. And so RUPRI and Art of the Rural's leadership has been really critical to building that national network. So in 2015, the NEA started a new program within our town, which was specifically intended to fund knowledge building around the topic of creative placemaking. And so what do we really mean by that is we are looking for non-art sector leaders, whether they're community development practitioners, economic development practitioners, rural policymakers, to begin to translate this arts and cultural work that we all know is happening on the local level to their broader network of folks, so it can be adopted and implemented, and that arts and culture continues to have a strong place at the table in driving some of those fantastic outcomes. So these knowledge building grants have been particularly exciting. As I mentioned, are the Rural and RUPRI, where in our very first round of grantees, we also have a grant that is going to the Rural Housing Assistance Council in partnership with Building Community Workshop to begin to train housing developers in rural communities on how to integrate arts and culture into the way that they both plan and execute housing projects. So I would just put a flag to take a look for the next issue of Rural Voices, where you'll be able to hear a lot more about case studies and great work that's happening all across the nation, particularly in that housing and community development sector. And I would also just say the partnership with the Delta Regional Authority has just been so incredibly rich. I mean, I think from the arts and cultural sector, I've learned so much about sort of the priorities and ways and language that economic developers come to the table in local communities and how they're really thinking about that work. And Chuck is still on the road participating in these regional workshops, but NEA has been really proud to also participate in the regional workshops and learn a lot from our local leaders about what are some of the most pressing challenges in rural America, what are some of the innovative ideas that they're already piloting. And as a national federal agency, we want to continue to spread that wisdom, those best practices and ideas. And so another way that we really see that playing out is thanks to Linda's leadership. We recently just announced in June an award to the National Association of Counties, and they're going to be partnering with Americans for the Arts on a really exciting new initiative for their membership base to begin again to highlight, profile, and pilot some of these ideas around creative placemaking so that local leaders, talking about county officials, mayors, town managers, to begin to work with the arts and cultural community to really revitalize and drive attraction and retention of residents in places all across rural America. So I think with that, I'll just send it over to Linda to tell you a little bit more. That's just my teaser in terms of what I'm really, really jazzed about and excited to be on this call today to speak with all of you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jen. And next, we're going to turn it to Linda to talk about this. When we talk about national rural policy, there's two organizations that lead it, without a doubt. One is the National Association of Counties, and one is the National Association of Development Organizations. And their leadership has really been visionary over the years, and in this regard, they are as well. Before I turn it to Lynn, I just want to simply say that Jen has been a mentor and a visionary in this, and none of us would be here today without her leadership and the leadership of NEA. It's been absolutely critical to this regeneration in rural America, and we're extremely grateful. Linda, take it away, please.
Thanks so much, Chuck. Thanks to Jen and all of the Art of the Rural folks. I love being on this call, this webinar with all of you, because as Chris mentioned, you walk away from being around some of these folks so fully energized to just get back at this great work. So by way of background, I would note for folks that I was an elected official in Cedar Rapids, Iowa in the county for about 14 years. But before that, I was a museum director, have worked a lot in not-for-profits, and have worked on the concept essentially of creative placemaking for much of my career. What I value is that being at NACo, our goal in partnering with Americans for the Arts with the support of NEA is really to build the kind of team-based approach to creative placemaking. So we will be inviting grants this fall for teams from communities of under 200,000. So we're going a little bit larger than the strictly rural. And asking folks to apply to participate with us. We are encouraging folks to look at a variety of partners. We want at least one elected official on the team. The teams can be 4 or 5 people. We will next spring be bringing them to Des Moines, Iowa, which has had a really good track record in the development of their arts community and the way they've expanded and defined the community. This can happen in both, really in small and medium-sized communities as well. What we're encouraging is that folks look to perhaps, as Chris has noted, some different partners. So sometimes people in the arts community tend to think of the same folks over and over again. And as Chris noted, when you can connect the arts with the economic developers, when you can connect the arts with the bankers, with the hospital administrator, this is all about how do you create community? What are the things that make us who we are? And that conversation has to happen in more than just the arts community. It has to connect people. And people really, you want people celebrating and disseminating those connections and those things that happen in small communities all over the United States. So when those teams are selected, as I noted, we'll bring them to Des Moines. We're going to do several days together, and much like what Chris is doing down in the Delta, we're going to help people understand building assets, seeking funding, celebrating the nature of their own community. And then we're going to ask those teams to return to our annual conference. I know Chris is excited about this next summer in Nashville. We may have to bring them in so that we can then use those groups to train another cohort. We won't be able to bring in everybody who applies, but all those people who apply and others, we will invite at our next conference to really learn from the people who have already journeyed on that path. So because I do not multitask well sometimes, I'm going to type some things in later after I'm done. But I also want to note that we partnered with Joe McKinney and NATO to do some work in coal-reliant counties. So we've done those workshops both in the Appalachian region and we've done them out west. But in the context of those workshops, we have also spoken about creative placemaking. It is amazing when you find out what is going on and the resources that are there, and sometimes the things that people are doing, but they're not necessarily talking about. So we need to get people to talk and to share. And people are discovering that, and I think that Chris would confirm this, we may not be in the place where Smaller communities are going to attract the economic development of 300 to 400 to 500 jobs, but they will attract the companies that will bring 30 or 50 jobs. And if you do that 5 or 10 times over, you get that magnification, but you do it on the basis that people come to a place because they appreciate the place. So there are a couple of books that people may have already be familiar. One is called For the Love of Cities by Peter Kageyama. And there's a much older book by a gentleman named Robert Archibald that was from the St. Louis area called A Place to Remember and Using History to Build Community. A lot of it, as Chris has noted, is valuing where you live. When you love the place that you live, and many of us may remember, where did you go to visit your grandparents? Or where did you grow up? That there are just those iconic things that you did when you were young that you want to take your kids back to do. And what has happened now is that there are places like Green River, Utah, a very small community out west that young people are going to, and they're transforming the community. And they're doing it with arts and with housing. They're building their own communities. They're building the values that they want to see. So we're really excited. We're thankful to NEA for their support in this. We are very excited to be partnering with Americans for the Arts and to be a part of this broader creative placemaking initiative. So with that, Chuck, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thanks. And again, Linda, thanks for your leadership at NACo and Americans for the Arts. One of the organizations over the years that has lifted up the assets that are in a place and united them in ways that I just am so amazingly appreciative of is the National Association of Development Organizations. And Joe McKinney is with us today, Executive Director. And Joe, I know this has gotten in your roundhouse fairly significantly, so would you share a bit the NATO perspective on all this? And there are a lot of questions coming in. We'll get to them. So, Joe?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. I appreciate the opportunity to, used to be in the room, but on the screen with everyone today. The best thing about going last on a panel is everything of value has been said, so I just have to say I agree with everything. But I do want to mention briefly NATO's involvement with creative placemaking over the years and kind of the direction that we see it going. For quick reference, NATO is the National Association of Development Organizations. We work primarily with kind of small metro and rural regional development organizations. They go by different names, COGS, regional councils, and so forth. There's over 500 across the country. And we've been involved in different parts of creative placemaking for a number of years. I think it started out really in the late 90s, early 2000s, as has been mentioned, when we're looking at quality of place. I think traditionally rural communities may sometimes lag behind in trends and innovations, but in the field of creative placemaking, I think all the panelists will agree that rural communities have really been the leaders in this. And I say this with confidence because I was recently in Boston in a meeting and with a number of larger community development groups, and they're just now talking about some of the things to do with creative placemaking. And I'm sitting there really quiet saying, hey, rural America has been doing this for a number of years. So we started really with quality of place, which in my view initially was linking what's unique about your community and capitalizing on that. But in the early 2000s, really it was a planning initiative. And really where I see creative placemaking going in what NATO has been involved with is more of an implementation. And it's getting those kind of new thinkers in a room with decision makers. And I applaud Chris Masingill and can't say it enough. He's probably sick of me saying it, but really it takes a champion like Chris to promote this initiative, one, on a regional level. I know a lot of local efforts that are going on, and I'll reference some of those, but the impact of a regional project and initiative really takes a champion like Chris, and I always get fired up hearing Chris talk about it, because I really know that he is engaged. I know he's a traditional economic development practitioner, and to see him fully engaged and become, as he said, a disciple of creative placemaking is exciting. One of the things that that NATO has been involved with recently that I think really helps this initiative is looking at kind of wealth on a rural community. It's been mentioned several times. It's hard for rural communities to compete when you're looking at job creation on a large scale. Very few times do rural communities see the large job creators like I guess the car, auto plants and so forth that were mentioned. And so NATO really took a look back last year at wealth in rural communities, and we recently, last year, put out a publication called Wealth Creation in Rural Communities, which really defines it differently than just number of jobs created, but impact on your community. And certainly creative placemaking fits perfectly in this initiative. It ties in a number of different things, including culture. And so I would encourage those that are in rural communities that are interested to take a look at that piece that we did and its impact on creative placemaking. The other thing I would say is, one, I applaud NACo's involvement in the project that Linda mentioned. That's transformative as well to have impact nationwide. Glad to hear it's focused on rural communities, and if it builds on what we've done together with coal communities in different parts of the country, it's going to be a great project, and I'm excited to hear that. And also, I think NEA's involvement in this initiative is essential. I have an incoming president of our association, our national association, who's a friend of Linda's in Iowa and was just up recently. We met with NEA, and we just talked about what's going on across the country, and creative placemaking certainly was a big part of that. And the thing that I remember most about our meeting is when we left, Doug said, that's the first time I've been in the room with NEA where they spoke the exact language I did. They understand economic development, and so it's kind of uplifting to hear one of your national leaders saying, they're speaking our language. So really excited about that. Let me just really quickly end by just giving you some examples of impact and what this can do. And some of these are in the Delta region, some are not, but I think they're good resources to look at as you, if you might have an interest in becoming involved in this, the real issue. And I will start out with my hometown in Asheville, North Carolina. I was I grew up in Asheville and saw it transform into what it is today. And a big part of that was a focus on creative placemaking. And some of you may enjoy alcoholic beverages. Asheville's really become a mecca for the craft beverage industry. And it really started out with a discussion on placemaking and what's important. And they've had a number of national and local breweries really explode, bring a number of jobs, not only in the production of that, but certainly in tourism. And the regional council there at Land of Sky was in really early on planning for that and how to capitalize on that. And I would encourage you to take a look at that as an example of an impact on a small metro and rural community. Also, another one is the Black Belt Treasures in Alabama. They've got a cultural center who've been working with creative placemaking impact on jobs for a number of years, and we've been a part of helping them with some resources, and that's really taken off and really done well. And Lyndon mentioned as well the things we're doing in Kentucky with diversifying some of the economies that have been coal dependent for a number of years. They're doing a lot of innovative things in Kentucky and looking at job creation, out of necessity, and we're excited about being a part of that. So with that, I'm glad to be a part of this. I'm encouraged hearing some examples today of things that are going to be exciting and we want to be a part of. So thanks, Chuck.
Well, Joe, I want to thank you. Just for the folks that are on, the leadership that NATO has taken in rethinking what rural wealth is truly exciting. And if you really need to reach out for that NATO report, I think it's one of the most significant ones in the field right now. We're really honored at RUPRI to be the recipient of one of 4 national NEA labs. And our lab will focus entirely on rethinking what rural wealth is and how it relates to innovation and entrepreneurship. And Joe and his members are really leading that thinking in the public sector. We've had a whole bunch of questions. Let me lead with one. To everyone here, and maybe Chris, you start. We've got a couple questions about where this DRA leadership might go in really strengthening the rural quality of life argument in broader economic development funding. Chris, let's start with you. What is your thought? Let's go out a year or two, and let's assume that this major national development organization has systemically moved this. What's the hope that the rural quality of life entree into funding can be more systemically strengthened? We're all on this phone because of NEA's work in this creative placemaking. What are the thoughts of all of you about moving forward in sustaining resources for this really, really critical rural policy question? Chris, would you take it first, and then let's ask everyone else if they might just reflect on that a minute. We've had several questions on that already.
All right. Well, I'll certainly give it a shot. A couple of things come to mind in relation to that question, Chuck. The first one is that, again, I want to reinforce that at DRA, we really believe that this is not just a one-off strategy that we're talking about in the context of some technical workshops, and then we're going to go back to the business as usual and keep on doing things. We really believe that creative placemaking needs to be incorporated in every aspect of community and economic development. It's not some fad that, oh, it's kind of cool to include arts and culture in a conversation. It's bigger than that. We're talking about a real mindset change with community leaders, practitioners, elected officials, that this is just a part of the new norm for looking at strategies in not only rural America, but in the urban core. This should be a part of the practice of economic development in real ways every day. That's the first point. The second point, and by doing that, you will impact the quality of life. We now know, because creative placemaking is not a new concept, it's not something that just has been created. We've been doing this type of work for a long time. We've been actually funding what we would determine now as creative placemaking projects at DRA for a long time. We've been around for 17 years now, and we've invested in the infrastructure of some of these projects for a long time. That's a good thing. Now we just need to get greater engagement across the board, stronger collaborations, and it needs to establish a new norm. And you do that by recognizing, if you are a local economic development industrial board, or you're a local chamber, or if you've got economic development dollars that your community set aside, those dollars need to be used to support this strategy in real ways. So when you're looking at projects and it's tied to this kind of concept, we need to treat this with the same level of engagement as we would a workforce development project, as we would a relocation project. Those resources should be available to support and to uplift these type of projects if they're truly integrated into the community and economic development strategy. We don't have a strategy just for arts and culture, and we don't have a strategy just for workforce, and we don't have a strategy just for our retention efforts on our existing businesses and or manufacturing in our community. They need to be all tied together. And by doing that, we need to have local leaders that are sitting on these local economic development boards go, hey, we've got resources because we use that to help close deals. Well, we need to be thinking in closing deals. You're also closing deals as it relates to creative placemaking projects, because by doing that, you are increasing the quality of life of your people. You are retaining talent. You are being more competitive in new job creation opportunities. And not to mention, you're creating a greater connection of your people to the community and to the place that we call home. And you do that with resources. And the last thing I'd say about that, Chuck, is that I hope that DRA continues to play a big role in this space, just like we do with workforce training and education, just like we do to promote small business development and entrepreneurship. These things are not one-offs. They're all tied together. We know when you implement creative placemaking, you are also creating an opportunity to strengthen workforce training. You're creating new opportunities, particularly in the arts and culture world, for entrepreneurship and small businesses. And we still know, particularly as an economic developer, the new net jobs that are being created are created by small businesses in your community. And that's particularly the case in rural America. So let's don't forget the reality. Let's don't start having a lofty policy conversation. This is a real world. This is about protecting our communities. This is about protecting our young people and about growing economic opportunities through creative placemaking. But you can't just say it. Your actions have to be followed by real tools and resources that you put on the table at the state level, at the federal level, and at the local level. And I hope DRA continues to show commitment. As many of you all know, I'm on the downhill slide. My tenure is about to be over, and it's been a great ride, and I've been honored to serve. And I hope that the next leader sees the value in being connected with local leadership and national partners like you all in making sure that this effort continues.
Thanks, Chris, very much for that. Let's ask others on that question of as we move on down the trail, how do we strengthen the overall belief in real quality of life as an important fundable item within the broader portfolio? Other thoughts?
I think, Linda here, I think it's really critical to follow on that you really want to engage your local elected officials. And some people are reticent about that. They're scared about it. But I think you can go in, and as Chris has noted, you can make a very good economic case for why creative placemaking, which could be based, as Joe noted, in craft liquor. It might be in the arts. And I'll give you a quick example. Our community about 9 years ago here in Iowa had a really big flood. And one of the things that I led was Percent for the Arts in all of our rebuilding. So every single building now has really significant arts features within the buildings. And the county also chose to put a $250,000 piece of sculpture in a central park area that goes back to the founding of the community. So it really is central to the place. And I would tell you, I drove by there last night and there were a bunch of people there. They have lights in the park now and kids playing underneath the sculpture. The building of that is important. And so making sure that your chamber, your economic development folks, your elected official are also connected to the arts folks. So one of the values, Chuck, of the workshop that you did last fall was that I've had a couple people from Iowa and other places call me and say, how do I do this? And so I've laid out some strategies for them to engage with their local officials, which is what makes this NEA funding so important, because it's about how you build that group of people that speak the common language, that are valuing creative placemaking, working together. Because the last thing an elected official wants to do is get pushback when they make a financial commitment to this kind of thing. So it's critical to build those partnerships ahead of time. And I would also encourage folks to check on the Americans for the Arts, because oftentimes your local leaders do not understand the amount of economic impact that their arts community has. There are great examples up in Northwest Wisconsin, in Southeast Minnesota. So it's not just the Delta region, love you, Chris, but there are places all over this country that are doing really amazing things in small communities, and they're making commitments, and the financial return is enormous. So I really think building the connected group of people, and it's got to include your local elected officials.
Joe, do you have thoughts?
I do, real quickly. I want to echo what's been said and give you an idea why I think this DRA's involvement and NEA's involvement is so important. And that is, I said I grew up in Asheville. That's not true. I call Asheville my home, but I grew up in a community of 2,500 people. And I'm sure a lot that are on the webinar are in similar towns. And I'll say that having worked in local government, I know there are no resources, not just limited, there are no resources to take chances on good ideas. In the economic development field, they're results driven. What this opportunity is to allow communities to have some resources from DRA, from NEA, that move a good idea through a planning process that show results. And there's a lot that's been mentioned today of communities that have results from this. And you can take this process and work on a local and regional level to show this is not just a good idea, this is the results that can come from this. And Chuck asked us to look 2 and 3 years out. To me, 2 and 3 years out is more local investment, not just government dollars, but private sector dollars, your community dollars in this field, because it is results oriented, it is proven. And the good thing about this is you don't go to your community and say, let's do exactly what Asheville, North Carolina is doing. It is, let's define what's unique to our region and capitalize on that. And that's huge. And I just wanted to make that point, that this is why I think it's transformative. There's not often those dollars to get from a good idea to a results-driven plan. So,
Joe, those comments are so spot on. Jen, do you have thoughts on that one?
No, I'll just say this is really music to my ears, because the idea was to be able to pilot and demonstrate the success of this type of work in local communities. And I would just encourage all of you listening in, you're hearing about several fantastic networks to absolutely tap into, from RUPRI, Art of the Rural, NATO, NACo, and also to learn from the Delta region about what they're doing. And I would just encourage everyone to tap into those networks, because we'll be able to continue to lift up these great stories of what's happening across the nation and get to that place that Joe alluded to earlier, where it's really a norm of how we do economic development, to engage the arts and cultural community, to both help connect residents, to help illuminate the great things that are already happening locally, to help energize and inject new energy into some of your rural communities. And so I think that's a really critical thing to leave with, is that there are great resources out there, and this network building is really happening, and you should all jump in and share the work that you're doing locally as well. Thanks,
Jen. We're going to close here in a minute. A couple final thoughts for those of you that are on the line. If you're in the Delta, the response has been just candidly so overwhelming that we're going to move the deadline to indicate you want to apply to the 4th of August, and the final grant must be in by the 21st of August. That is simply a response to the massive response that has come in the region. Closing, I'll say 2 things, leading off what Joe said. This is about arts, but it's also about culture. And culture is about who you are, where you worship, how you sing, what you eat, what's your history, what are the local stories, what's different that's a new asset, your natural environment. And until that all gets pushed into a community planning process by, frankly, local leadership, it is not going to get to the scale that Joe and Linda have talked about. And so that's part of what we're doing, and that's why we're so excited local elected officials are coming to this table. we're really honored to have had these 4 national leaders. I want to let Chris close it, and we'll turn it back to Matt Fluharty. Chris, do you have final thoughts? And just on behalf of all of us, we want to express our appreciation for your absolutely visionary leadership. Chris, would you close it out and give it back to Matt? And thank you all that have been online for listening, and be in touch with the networks Jen mentioned. Chris, final words.
Thank you, Chuck. You're awful kind with those comments, and we certainly don't deserve them. This is about survivability for us. We see an opportunity to continue to grow rural America and give other ideas and put other thoughts on the table so we can be competitive with the rest of the country and keeping our people and our current jobs and also growing jobs. And we wouldn't be doing this type of effort if it hadn't been for the education with you over these years and your advocacy for rural America and the impact of what's happening in Next Gen and the work you're doing. And I tell you, the impact that Linda and Joe have had on me in the context of this, and Jen, to you and NEA for laying the groundwork, for really plowing this field early on to say this is something that's valuable. And to that point, as we close out, we still have a lot of work to do. This is really about being realistic about where we are. The worlds of economic development, the world of community development, the world of industrial recruitment, the way, and Linda, you were so spot on with your comments about engaging with local elected officials and making sure that they understand the kind of projects and speaking their language. We've talked about that in other sessions, and Joe, you've reinforced that, and we've all kind of sensed that. And part of my closing comment would be to everybody on this call is that we still have a lot more work to do with that. It's easy for us to talk about that in the context because we're all drinking the Kool-Aid right now. But in the real world, our elected officials have so many challenges facing them. Joe made a great point about it in the world of economic development. Developers are being held accountable by job creation. And we're still trying to change that mindset, that it's bigger than that. It's not just about job creation. And there are so many other elements about economic development. But we truly believe that this is a strategy that we need to continue to educate people about up and down the community leader ladder. We need to continue to put resources towards, and we really need to make sure that we're integrating this idea into every aspect of community and economic development. And that when we're talking about how we grow our community, how we grow economic opportunities, when we see the opportunity to impact workforce training and small business development and entrepreneurship, revitalizing our vacant buildings and lands and infrastructure, creating jobs through construction and local businesses and our cultural activities and training the next generation of workers, we believe that this is something that is very real. But we still have a long ways to go, and to use Linda's thoughts, speaking that language across the board is, I think, priority number one, because that creates an understanding. It creates the groundwork for collaboration and partnerships, and really maximizes the real value of having this way of thinking at the table when we're trying to create jobs at the local level. So thank you all very much. Thank you for allowing us to participate and play a small role, and we're going to continue to be an advocate for this idea.
Well, Chris, we're all blessed you're on this journey, and I want to thank Art of the Rural. Savannah and Matt, these seminars have been fantastic, and we'll turn it back to you, Matt. Thanks for the opportunity to have been on this.
All right, thank you. Chairman Masingill, thank you again. You know, the Kool-Aid tastes really good.
The Kool-Aid is great. I came to it earlier.
You know, on behalf of Art of the Rural and RUPRI, we just really want to thank Chris and Joe, Linda and Jen for their time this morning and for sharing, I mean, the full horizon of this whole conversation and the partnerships that are happening and that are ahead in this work. What I'd like to say for folks who are listening, probably, you know, later today or at the very latest tomorrow morning, we will have an archived version of this conversation, and Art of the Rural and RUPRI will share it out along with our partners, because I sense as I was listening to this, that this is going to get emailed all around the place. I mean, there's so many gems and lightning bolts in this. It was a really transformative conversation to be a part of. In closing, what I would just like to say is I think the one thing that really motivated Art of the Rural and RUPRI to come together with Next Gen was I think, although we do different things, we feel that there are certain forms of distance that really characterize the rural part of our respective sectors. It's cultural, it's geographic, and there's so many forms of it. And what has been so exciting about being with you all is that your organizations and your colleagues are breaking that distance down, building partnerships, and contributing to a form of momentum that is going to radically change the lives of folks in rural communities. And I just want to express our interest. And I'd also just, as someone who is an artist and somebody in the cultural part of this equation, we do the work we do because we love it and we love our places, but that distance has a lot of effects on us as artists. And it takes a toll. And to hear the ideas that the four of you expressed, I just, on behalf of artists, just want to share how wonderful and inspiring and grounding it is to hear this work articulated and really held up by you all. So thank you so much for all of your contributions. We're really proud to be on the same boat with you all. It's pretty great as well, because in only another week, if folks who are with us, folks from across the sectors who have joined us for the call today around the country, if this has piqued your interest, I invite you all to come back and join us on noon Eastern on July 19th, where we'll have another hour to learn more about knowledge building and rural creative placemaking. As Jen has mentioned, since 2009, the NEA has been supporting the various R-Town programs with investments and technical assistance. And this year is going to mark the 4th cycle of NEA funding for projects that build knowledge about creative placemaking. And we're really excited because we have 4 folks from various projects around the nation who are going to share more about their work and about how they have been able to really build conversation, consensus, communication, and research. So if this has really kind of piqued your interest, please join us again on the 19th at noon, where we'll be joined by Kali Arroyo from the RUPRI NEA Research Lab. We'll be joined by Judy Jennings, who is running an NEA project called Creative Placemaking from the Community Up. Also with Erica Nelson, who is the author of an Americans for the Arts Rural Public Art Policy White Paper, as well as Carl Itia Swanson from Springboard for the Arts and their Creative Exchange Network. So folks, if this has caught your eye, please join us again, July 19th at noon. And again, thank you for all the folks around the country who have joined us, and again, for our 4 panelists, and for Chuck Coolhardy from RUPRI for moderating. Thank you so much. I hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Matt.